up to discover that money has been taken from your bank account is a nightmare. Now imagine the nightmare you'd face when your bank tells you that you're responsible, despite you being nowhere near the place the money was taken, and having overwhelming evidence to prove that you're the victim of fraud. It's a horrible reality for Ian Williams, a scam victim battling the National Australia Bank for its fraud team's inaction and enablement of this scam. This is the podcast that keeps you safe from scams, hacks, and frauds. The best way to stay up to date on our show is through your favourite podcast app. Subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, or YouTube. It's a cold spring morning in Bendigo, a fair-sized city of about 100,000 people, about 150 kilometres or 90 miles north of Melbourne in Australia. Ian Williams, now 73, is a pensioner, going through his normal routine in the bathroom. As he takes a seat on the porcelain throne, he decides that this is the perfect time to check his banking app to make sure that there are no fraudulent transactions on his account. He discovers to his horror that $1,338 has been taken from his account a few days ago. He taps further into the app and checks the details. He phones the bank, as he should, and reports the transactions as fraud. The bank's fraud team said it would investigate and called him back 2 hours later. The fraud team informed him that their data indicated that payments had been made with a Google Wallet at a supermarket in Melbourne during the middle of the night. As he used his thumbprint, there was no fraud to investigate. The problem, of course, is that he wasn't in Melbourne that night, and you definitely don't travel to Melbourne just to go to the supermarket. Bendigo has plenty. His map app tracks his movements and shows that he hasn't left Bendigo. Not only that, he has an app that monitors his sleep, and it shows definitively that he was at his home in Bendigo asleep. None of this was making any sense. Ian again did the right thing. He went to the police with all this evidence and made a statement. He completed a fraud pack and even had an officer sign a witness statement that he'd seen the evidence that Ian had collected. Surely that should be the end of it, right? This should be the bit of the podcast where I encourage you to check out the website and sign off. Well, no, that would be a boring story. The bank was completely unmoved. The police, however, weren't, and they contacted the supermarket and obtained a copy of the CCTV. It probably won't surprise you to learn that the tape showed definitively he was not there, and it was two young men who'd managed to obtain copies of his credit card details somehow and bought a load of gift cards to cash out on the scam. Surely by now the bank had been moved to act against this fraud, right? After involving the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, the bank was willing to pay back the $1,338 to make this go away. But there were strings attached. The bank specifically wanted Ian not to discuss the case and to agree the refund didn't imply that the bank accepted responsibility for the fraud, and they weren't offering any compensation for poor service. Insulted by this offer and still very unhappy about the way he'd been treated and accused of fraud himself, Ian said no. 5 months later, the bank attempted to put the scam behind them, increasing the amount to $1,500. Ian again said no, holding out for a proper apology and acknowledgement of fault. Ian decided to launch a crusade against the bank in an attempt to change the way it handles fraud. He sought legal advice but found little appetite. Legal experts were afraid to take on one of Australia's biggest banks, so he did it himself. He immersed himself in case law and statutes, and prepared a 14-page writ. Now, if you're going to court, judges expect that you've tried everything you can first. They become pretty upset if you haven't. So he attended the bank's headquarters in Melbourne, told the bank that as he'd been hit for 5.5% of his annual income, they should pay him 5.5% of their annual profits as compensation for the lost amount to the fraud. This came to 379 million Australian dollars. He gave them 4 weeks to respond to the case. They didn't respond, so he took them to court. We'd love to tell you that this was an amazing David and Goliath battle, but they didn't even show up. Ian won a default judgment. The National Australia Bank appealed to the Supreme Court of Victoria, claiming that they'd not attended as they'd lost the paperwork, and requested that the case be recalled. The Supreme Court has agreed, and Ian will soon be battling this particular dragon in court. Now, the smart money is on this case not going much further. Although the bank's fraud team has clearly messed up, courts typically try to put people back in the position they were before the incident. So the idea that Ian will be getting $379 million is probably a non-starter. Still, it's a great way of grabbing headlines and highlighting just how badly this bank has treated this scam victim and how widespread this type of fraud is. But how on earth did his details get into a Google wallet on someone else's phone? Surely this is some isolated freak event. Well, no. Cybersecurity expert Ford Merrill says that you can buy phones in China loaded with stolen credit cards. And they sell them by the crate. They don't even bother to offer to sell them one at a time. You have to buy a whole crate. We don't know how Ian's details were taken, but Krebs on Security has been monitoring how these scams happen, so we have a pretty good idea. Just a question before we go on. When was the last time you got a text message about a delivery? For me, it was earlier today, but I'd be surprised if any of us could honestly say we haven't had one of these messages this week. Buying online has just become so easy. Have you ever received one about a problem with your delivery that has then gone on to ask for your card number, either to verify your identity, pay some underpaid postage, or a redelivery fee? Scammers use these messages to grab your card details and then pop them into Google and Apple wallets under their control. And just in case you get cold feet, they don't wait for you to hit submit or OK. They capture every keystroke on their site. They might even then call you, reminding you of this message to help convince you that they're your bank's fraud department. This has happened with my wife. Now, if you've used one of these wallets, you'll know that they ask you for a code to set up a card. The scammers follow up by asking you to give them that code too, and thinking it's all legitimate and safe. It could be days, weeks, or months before you realize that you've been the victim of a scam. If you are getting these messages, the best thing you can do is not to click on any links in any text message. If you want to check up on a delivery, go back to the website you ordered it from, and if there isn't a direct link to the courier, get the delivery reference number from there, and then go to the courier's website directly. Never ever enter your card details simply because a link on a text message told you to. I've been C, and this has been Scams, Hacks and Frauds. If you've got a minute, please leave a review on your favourite podcast app just to tell us how we're doing. And remember to share your story. You can email us at scamshacksandfrauds.com. This podcast is available to reuse for free under the Creative Commons with Attribution Share Alike license. The music is not included in this license. For more information on the Creative Commons license, please visit creativecommons.org.